Now, why am I not surprised that both Biden and Jerome Powell were wrong yet again? Yep, you heard that right, guys. It seems like they may have underestimated inflation yet again, as the latest inflation report just came out, proving forecasts wrong and pegging the Fed's target rate of 2% to be reached by 2026. Yeah, 2026, guys. So what's up with that? So yeah, guys, it looks like the cost of gas, eggs, and rent just keeps inflation stubbornly high. Not to mention everything else. Am I right? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but almost every single grocery item that I buy has nearly doubled. So really, I'm not surprised that these inflation numbers are still staying high. In fact, I would not be surprised if the government has purposely been keeping the public numbers low. What do you guys think? Anyway, let's see what this means for your money and your cash flow, and if the Fed is going to hit us with yet another monster rate hike on our mortgages and our credit cards. Oh, and one more important headline that mainstream media doesn't seem to be talking about right now, or at least not to the extent that they need to. The Ohio train crash that released all sorts of toxic chemicals into the air. Yeah, definitely some scary stuff and more fallout from that. Here's a clip.
50 train cars carrying toxic chemicals derailed from tracks in Ohio. We're talking irritants, cancerous gases, and chemicals with byproducts that were weaponized during World War I, with the state conducting what they called a controlled release, arguing these chemicals would have exploded otherwise, and evacuating nearby residents. And now they claim the area is safe again and that air samples are coming back normal. But residents who've returned have reported headaches, nausea, and burning eyes. Many saying the air smells like nail polish, burning tires, or chlorine, and others concerned that the chemicals may have made its way into the waterways, with reports of dead fish floating in streams. Now, officials say they've been able to control affected runoff, but this is we're seeing more anecdotal and unverified reports spreading online, with officials having yet to address many of these claims, leading many to understandably be terrified.
I am definitely smelling a toxic cover-up here, but what do you guys think? Drop me a comment down below. So yeah, this is technically the first inflation reading that we've got for the year, and lo and behold, it says that prices still remain stubbornly high with the latest CPI inflation report. So the consumer price index, or the CPI, decreased by 0.1% to 6.4% on an annual basis. However, it was higher than anticipated by many of the government's forecasts, meaning the rate that inflation is going down is moving at a snail's pace, and it puts the Fed's target of 2% inflation all the way out to 2026. Not good. I just heard from a friend who works in Walmart. Corporate finally gave them a raise, but immediately after, their cheapest loaf of bread jumped from 99 cents to $1.32. Now that is a 30% increase overnight. And I'm definitely sure that that was way more than the raise that they gave to their employees. I know they're not giving out 30% raises. Now this is boots on the ground information for you guys. Now looking at the bigger picture, the data was higher than estimates, as economists expected inflation to increase at an annual pace of 6.2% according to the Dow Jones. They estimated that core CPI to increase at 5.4% annual rate. Now, one investment analyst commented that, quote, January's higher than expected CPI increase likely squashes any remaining outlook for a Fed pivot in 2023. Now, today's report again reiterates what Jerome Powell has been indicating. We don't quite have a grasp on inflation, and there's still work to be done, end quote. Now, you may have heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. It looks like the Fed is still losing its fight against inflation, and if this continues, we may be headed for a very serious stagflation cliff that could take Americans' jobs and homes away from them. Definitely, the Fed still has a lot of work to do to be able to tame inflation, and that it has a long way to go to achieve its 2% goal. And so that means more rate hikes for your credit cards and your mortgages, guys. But like they said here, 25 basis point hikes are all but locked in for March and May. Now, I can imagine what the cumulative impact of all of this rate tightening and quantitative tightening will have on our economy. And we've heard all sorts of predictions: a hard landing, a soft landing, to even some chatter about no landing, just a massive free-for-all. Now, I am definitely feeling that Biden and the Fed may be getting complacent over here, especially over the severity of an impending recession. It's like they don't seem to see what prices are doing to the average American. But what do you guys think? Stock market experts advise, quote, longer-term investors have patience. It could be a good day to buy on the dip and look through this next year or two of market activity and focus instead on creating future wealth, end quote. Prices of meats, poultry, fish, and eggs, they increased 0.7% over the month. Prices for eggs have been soaring for the past few months, and they're still continuing their upward climb. They rose 8.5% for the month and overall represented a whopping 70% annual increase. Eggs, guys, we're talking about a 70% increase on egg prices. How ridiculous is that? In fact, eggs used to be like a great cheap source of protein. Not anymore. But really, taking the headlines are the shelter prices, rents, housing, mortgages, basically. Housing prices continue to rise consistently as well, in large part because rent renewals are typically just once a year. So there is a lag, and low inventory is keeping home purchase prices high. Grocery inflation inflation is stubbornly high as well, and inflation in many services categories. It's still very broad-based. Now, it does bear mentioning that a lag between the Fed's rate hikes and the effects on the economy, and that this is a reminder that we still have a ways to go before we declare victory over inflation. Experts are crossing their fingers at this point. They're saying, quote, "In some respects, we're dealing with the worst of it now because inflation is still high and higher interest rates are pinching borrowers, especially people with credit card debt and those in the market for a new mortgage," end quote. Then, of course, there's what Fed Chair Jerome Powell is doing, which is making up words just to prove that they're doing something. Have you heard him talking about what he's calling super core inflation? So yeah, apparently the rise in housing prices is just keeping the overall inflation number high. So what does Jerome Powell do? Just go ahead and ignore it and just look at the numbers that he wants to look at. Yep, that's right, guys. Some Fed officials, including Jerome Powell, they say they're looking more closely at core services inflation minus shelter prices, super core, in determining the course of policy. The number rose 0.2% and was up 4% from a year ago. And just look at what they're blaming here. Quote, "When inflation repeatedly comes in higher than the forecast, as it did last year, or when the jobs report comes in with hundreds of thousands more jobs than anyone expected, as happened a couple weeks ago, it is hard to have confidence in any outlook," end quote. So basically, they're saying there are too many people with jobs, so they need to tighten up the economy so companies will start laying off more people. I mean, are we supposed to just believe that kind of logic, guys? Forecasts say that for the Fed to reach their target inflation number, they would have to lay off more than 1 million hardworking Americans. And what about the likes of Tesla's Elon Musk or Amazon's Jeff Bezos? Nothing. Seriously? This is just kind of messed up. Now, at this point, I think we should definitely be considering the possibility of a recession. And we have to talk about rent, guys. Is your lease up for renewal soon? Well, brace yourself. Rent growth has moderated, but renter demand is still pretty strong across the spectrum of apartments, single-family home rentals, and manufactured housing, even as the economy slows and signs of a recession remain elevated. Even increasing housing costs are not only constraining budgets, but they're also the biggest contributor to the nation's bump in inflation. Housing costs, which make up 40% of the index, rose 0.7% for the month, and it increased 7.9% from a year ago. The Fed's rate increases, which have led to higher mortgage rates, they have made the cost of buying a home even more expensive. The median price of a house went from $255,000 in early 2020 to $366,900 in December 2022. Now sure, rental relief is on the way. Apartment construction activity is at a 40-year high. As these empty units steadily reach the market, rent growth will tame down. That will also pull back the overall consumer price inflation. But what about the people having a hard time now? That's the question they need to be answering. Am I right, guys? Now, speaking of Americans suffering, let's talk about the toxic train derailment in Ohio. Here's another news clip.
It was like something out of a disaster movie. A massive train derailment led to an explosion, causing ominous plumes of smoke to billow over the quiet village of East Palestine. But it's what's in that smoke that has some residents still concerned about returning home. The train, operated by Norfolk Southern, was carrying several toxic chemicals used in plastic and paint manufacturing, including the carcinogenic vinyl chloride. Residents within a 1-mile radius of the derailment were ordered to evacuate immediately. Resident Melissa Henry recalled the moment she knew she had to leave with her son.
It smelled like really strong paint thinner, and then his eyes turned like bloodshot and he started coughing, and I was like, yeah, we're leaving.
After a controlled release of the toxic chemical from 5 of the derailed train cars, local officials consulted the Environmental Protection Agency and lifted the evacuation order on Wednesday.
We know everybody's frustrated, everybody wants to be in their homes. We did the best we can. The number one goal was public safety.
Now residents are reluctantly returning with deep anxiety about the lasting impact of the chemical leak on their health.
You notice how they make it sound like it's not a big deal when in reality there's this toxic death plume hovering over Ohio that's doing God knows what to people's health? All to cover up the mess of train company Norfolk Southern. The Norfolk Southern train was pulling at least 5 tanker cars containing vinyl chloride, which is a colorless but hazardous gas used to produce PVC plastic and vinyl products. They basically released and burned the toxic contents into the air, creating this massive smoke plume above the town for several hours. hours. They said it was either that or wait for the train to explode later on. Now, what they did not tell the people were the risks the chemicals may pose to humans. 2 days after the company vented and burned the vinyl chloride, East Palestine residents who evacuated were allowed to return to their homes, but they have complained of smells, headaches, nausea, and other ailments. Now, we're talking acute exposure to high levels of vinyl chloride, which is classified as a human carcinogen. This stuff in the air has been linked to several central nervous system effects, while chronic exposure has been shown to cause liver damage, including a rare form of liver cancer. In fact, one part of it, what they call phosgene, this is highly poisonous, and it was even used a lot during World War I as a choking agent, while hydrogen chloride is irritating and corrosive to any tissue that it comes in contact with. The EPA sent Norfolk Southern a general notice of potential liability letter where they said that the company may be responsible under Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act for cleanup of the site or costs EPA has incurred in cleaning up the site. End quote. So far, at least 4 class action lawsuits have already been filed against Norfolk Southern over the crash, alleging negligence. Now, what's really disturbing was that the train was not considered a high hazardous material train, despite the chemicals that were on board, meaning Norfolk Southern was not required to notify the state of the contents of the cars. That's why they called their mayor on Congress to review how high hazardous trains are classified. Seriously, when will these guys learn? And why does Congress just let them get away with this, you know? Well, you know me, guys. We're going to make sure to stay on top of this and any other shady deals in our next update. Well, guys, that was definitely another crazy video for the history books. That was today's CPI inflation update and daily news report. The CPI inflation report disaster, how this is going to affect everything from your credit card to your monthly rent, and the killer death plume that the train derailment in Ohio released up into the air. Now, with headlines like this, guys, you know we got to stay updated. Appreciate you guys sticking with me, and always thanks for lighting up the like button. Really appreciate you guys. Please be kind to one another, and I'll see you on the next video.